Well,
mention that you and I had the opportunity to share a nice campus in a place called Carlisle, Pennsylvania. I was at the
yes,
law school while you were at the college.
there we
I
go.
doubt that we overlapped only because I'm so silly old. But other than that, I'm really looking
Yes.
forward to a presentation.
Yes, Tim, excuse me. Just let me welcoming with Erik. Erik, hi, how are you?
Hello,
Yes, how are you?
I'm well, thank you.
It is our honor to have you today to presenting your presentation and Grace's presentation. And if you feel cannot extend your presentation, I'm ready to deliver the presentation of Grace.
Oh, I'm going to just take the time that was suggested by Larry. I'm not going to actually do Grace's presentation if you're okay with that.
No problem. If you want to extend, more than welcome. We need to learn from your experience, especially.
Yes, and please feel free to ask questions. So we're going to move in a slightly different direction here. Let me quickly introduce myself. My name is Erik Pages. I run an economic development consulting firm based in Arlington, Virginia, in the DC area. We work all around the United States and all around the world with a lot of experience in rural communities. I'm also a member of the board of Global Entrepreneurship Week and have been from the beginning. So I'm ecstatic to be participating in a global event during Global Entrepreneurship Week. So thank you to everyone for including me and for holding this event. So here's what we're going to do here over the next 15 minutes or so. So these are the topics we're going to be talking about. Why rural? What do we know about rural entrepreneurs in the United States? What's their impact, and what is different about rural entrepreneurship strategies? So just to set the stage, in the United States, of course, we'll talk about this in just a moment, but we have a significant, as you know, a significant political divide between rural and urban parts of the United States, but we also have a significant economic divide. And one of the challenges is that many of our rural communities in the United States are being left behind in an economic standpoint. And one of the strategies that rural communities in the United States are actively beginning to embrace, and this is really a new concept, is to be much more directive and focused on building ecosystems in rural communities. But as we'll see in the presentation, that's a little bit challenging, and it's you can't simply take Silicon Valley and move it to Iowa, or take Silicon Valley and move it to West Virginia. You need to think about doing things slightly different. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. So why are rural communities in the United States embracing entrepreneurship? Well, first is that it grows companies and creates jobs, but also many rural communities, like many of our colleagues in the Middle East, are focused on building a more diverse regional economy. Many parts of the rural United States have relied in the past on manufacturing and agriculture, and both of those industries may not necessarily be in decline, but they're providing less jobs than they did in the past. So diversifying the local economy is another reason why communities are doing it. And then last but not least, we have a large issue in the United States, as we do around the world, of brain drain, where young people leave their communities and go into the city. And entrepreneurship is viewed as a strategy to help them stay in the community and help build the community. So that's really the primary reason why this has become so prominent in American economic development circles. And it's becoming even more so now, of course, because of COVID-19. And what we know, or what at least we are projecting in rural America over the coming, say, 3 to 5 years, is we're going to see a big jump in what necessity entrepreneurship, where people are starting businesses because of lack of other options. And we're already starting to see lots of evidence of this. Expansion of remote work, which again is very common now because of COVID-19. Increase of outsourcing to rural areas. And we're also beginning to see some preliminary signs of movement of population from more urban regions to more rural parts of the region. This creates challenges for rural areas, but it also creates a lot of opportunities. Really, this slide, I really just wanted you to be able to see the figure there on this slide, but what we're seeing in rural America, and really across the United States and urban areas as well, is sort of a shift in economic development. Previously, economic development strategies were almost exclusively focused on providing tax cuts to businesses and tax incentives. And as you can see on that slide, these are really some of the most expensive ways that we can create jobs from an economic development standpoint. These strategies of customized job training, manufacturing extension, neighborhood development, these are all strategies that we might call business retention and expansion. We even use the term BRE in economic development circles in the United States. But really over the next probably 3 to 5 years in the United States in economic development, particularly focused on entrepreneurship, we're going to be in a business triage mode where we're trying to provide a soft landing for companies that may be going bankrupt or out of business. We've got to heal the wounded, where we help the ailing firms And then we've got to nurture the survivors. One thing we do know from history of pandemics and from history of economic downturns, lots of interesting and exciting businesses can be started in these kinds of situations. So there's challenges, but there's also significant opportunities. And the opportunities are most pronounced in rural communities. So this slide shows job growth in the United States from 2008 to 2017. So in the aftermath of the Great Recession, pre-COVID-19. But as you can see, almost all of the population growth and almost all of the job growth in the United States is in our large metro areas, and very little is occurring in rural communities. We also know from other statistics that have been developed, an assessment that the Brookings Institution did of innovation sectors, we know that only 5 communities in the United States accounted for 90% of all job growth in innovation sectors over the last decade. So that's Seattle, San Diego, California, Silicon Valley, Boston, and I'm sorry, I'm not remembering the last community, but only 5 communities accounted for 90% of all job growth in innovation sectors. None of that growth is occurring in rural communities, hence the interest in ecosystem building. Let me give you another way to think about this. So this is, 98% of the job growth is in metropolitan areas. Another way to look at it, I talked earlier about the political divide. We know that about 70 to 75% of America's economy, our gross national product, comes from communities that voted for President-elect Biden, and the remainder were in communities, largely rural communities, that voted for former President Trump. So we have a big challenge in rural development and reboosting the engine of prosperity and job growth. So we're interested in entrepreneurship in rural communities. We're interested in building ecosystems, but of course there's a lot of structural gaps that make it a little bit more challenging for us in these types of communities. We have a longer distance to markets, of course. The local markets are smaller. The networks for entrepreneurs are weaker and smaller. There's fewer resources. Access to talent is significant. And we also have significant infrastructure issues. We have a big problem in the United States with broadband in rural communities. We've had a situation in COVID-19 where many schools have had to close because the broadband is so poor that they cannot provide distance learning opportunities to youth. So it really is a big problem. And, if you're in a community that has poor broadband infrastructure, it's very difficult to be a successful entrepreneur in the American economy. But, we do know a few things based on our research and what we know about rural startups and entrepreneurs in the United States. If you look at an urban startup and you look at a startup in rural, and they're in the same business, say they're an IT company or they're a restaurant or they're a manufacturer, at the start, the companies look very similar. They might have the same amount of resources. They might have the same number of employees. And when the company achieves high growth, a rural firm really doesn't look that different from an urban firm. But in between, we know that rural firms tend to grow slower and they create fewer jobs. But at the same time, they're less likely to fail. So again, we know from significant economic research that most firms in the United States start small and stay small. But a firm is more likely to grow quickly and to get big if it's located in an urban area than if it's located in a rural area. So these are, again, our firm has worked in almost every state of the United States and done a lot of work overseas. And these are, if you said to me, what's your menu? What are the things that you need to do to support rural networks, to build more successful startups in rural America? These would be the 8 things I'm going to talk about. I'm really going to talk only about the bolded ones because of time constraints, but let me at least walk through each of these. Engage all means to bring in all types of entrepreneurs, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. Leverage diversity. One thing we don't do a very good job of in rural communities, in particular in the United States, is bringing in supporting entrepreneurs from minority communities, from different walks of life, new immigrants coming into the United States. Local customization, which I'll talk about in just a moment. Entrepreneur leadership. So again, the local networks need to be led and managed by local entrepreneurs, not by economic developers or even consultants like myself. Youth entrepreneurship, teaching young people about how to start and grow businesses, is a very important strategy for rural communities, particularly in defeating brain drain. Space matters, which is really about the power of community meeting places, and I'll talk about that in a moment. Streamlining permitting and licensing, and providing specialized resources. Basically, what we know from the U.S. experience is that, you know, public funds can be provided to support some technical assistance and some access to capital support. But in most cases, the most important thing that government can do is get out of the way, because a lot of the licensing, zoning, and planning rules are the things that really impact entrepreneurs. So let me talk about the three that I've got bolded here, and then we can open it up for conversation and questions. So engage all. One of the things we know in the United States is that there's often a conflation of technology and entrepreneurship. And what we know in the United States is that while most businesses stay small, high growth ventures come in every kind of business: car repair, hair cutting, making pizza, running restaurants, designing websites, you name it. But oftentimes, many of these firms that are not in tech-related industries are not actively encouraged to participate in networks. Again, what that does in rural communities is it reduces the number of people in networks, reduces the number of ideas in the network. What we know in rural community is that every person that has an interest in an entrepreneur, even a person that's just an advocate for entrepreneurs as opposed to an entrepreneur, must and should be involved in local networks and local ecosystem building. And we need to meet entrepreneurs where they are. Instead of saying, this is what you must do, you must follow this 7-step plan to be a successful business. We need to customize and design programs that help entrepreneurs at every walk of life, whether they're a technology firm, whether they just want to be a one-person operation, whether they want to be a gig economy worker, whatever it is. That's especially important in rural communities because there aren't enough entrepreneurs there, and we need to get more entrepreneurs engaged in starting and growing businesses. Second one of these strategies is local customization. So again, instead of trying to be the next Silicon Valley, rural communities need to think about what assets they have already. And these pictures give you two great examples. And I've been involved with both of these as a consultant. First is in Southwest Virginia. This is a very poor part of the country. This is Appalachia. It's a coal mining region, so it's been very challenged. They have designed their entrepreneurship programming around the fact that this is the place where American country music started and was invented. So if you know your country music, which you may or you may not, the Carter family, Bill Monroe, these are very famous early country music people in the United States. They came from this area. And so what they've done is tried to focus on building music-related industries, arts and crafts-related industries, tourism-related industries around this concept of the Crooked Road, the heritage music trail. The other picture comes from Vermont. Vermont is a state, a very, very small and rural state in New England, in the northeast part of the United States. And they are very excellent at making food. And so they have designed much of their entrepreneurship work around food, whether that's food distribution, food invention. So things like distilleries, breweries, cheese making, maple syrup. These are all things that in the United States that Vermont is very much known for. Another example would be the region of Appalachia, which again is one of the poorest parts of the United States. They've decided to build their entrepreneurship around these 4 pillars that you see on the slide: recreation and tourism, agriculture, alternative energy, and culture of health, which is really about helping your workforce and your community become more healthy. Last set of strategies is to create a physical home for entrepreneurship. So these pictures you see here, these are all co-working and meeting spaces that our firm has been involved in developing. The one on the left with the sky, that's in Vincennes, Indiana. The indoor picture is from Culpeper, Virginia. And the bottom, which is an old school that's been repurposed into a co-working space and an incubator, is in Honesdale, Pennsylvania. It's called the Sturbridge Project. These types of sites are especially important in rural communities because entrepreneurs are isolated because they're far from other people. This is a place where entrepreneurs come together. So these are not necessarily incubators. These are what the sociologists would call a third place. So in the sociological literature, we speak of the first place as your home, second place is where you work, and the third place is your community. This could be your church or your mosque. It could be a social club you're in. It could be a bar or a restaurant that you hang out in. But smart rural communities build third places where entrepreneurs can come together and meet and do business with one another. and it's becoming a very, very important part of rural entrepreneurship ecosystem building. And I would argue after COVID, it's going to become even more so. We have been locked down for 6 to 7 months, and people are hungry to physically connect. And hopefully once we get past COVID-19, these kinds of places will become even more important. So if I want to give you an example, I'm going to give you an example of one place that I would say is probably the best place in the United States in terms of supporting rural entrepreneurs. It would be the state of Kansas, which is smack in the middle of the United States. Very rural, it's ranching and farming. And this program, Network Kansas, is just really a very highly successful and effective program. It has a referral center so people can get connected to business service providers. It has an economic gardening program that coaches new businesses. It has a youth entrepreneurship program, and they also provide tax credits and angel investor tax credits for people that want to invest in startup businesses. So this would be a great example if you wanted to look at a best practice from the United States. Hopefully we're going to share these slides. I wanted to just put, these are other excellent programs that are operating in the United States. You see Kansas, Tennessee, North Carolina, Kentucky, and Arkansas. These are the US states where these programs are based. And then these are organizations that advocate for entrepreneurship. And I'm involved with several of these in a volunteer basis. But again, these are great programs around the United States that are focused on building healthy, robust, and resilient rural entrepreneurship networks. So this is my contact information. I welcome any questions or comments or feedback. I'll just leave this up for just a second, but then I'm going to stop my screen share so that I can see you and see if there's questions in the chat box. And again, I want to thank you for the opportunity, and I look forward to hanging out with people during the rest of the conference. So thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to share this information.
Doctor, super presentation. Very impressed with some of the places that you've worked. We're very close to the town of 1,000 people where I grew up, and so have seen the same kinds of problems that you are solving.
Trying to solve.